Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for our second Remote Nation Institute executive briefing. My name is Marian Snow, and we are conducting these 30-minute weekly briefings because as remote work experts, we're very concerned about some of the things that are happening right now in the world related to COVID-19, the coronavirus. We know that many of you have found yourself in a pretty unprecedented place where you may or may not have some experience with remote work, but you certainly don't have experience with remote work the way that we're remote working right now. It's not typical, it's pretty atypical, and it's pretty chaotic. And so because remote work is something that we have engaged in a long time, and because my team and I are very familiar with this, we're trying to provide a public service that is being hosted not only by the Remote Nation Institute, but also by Sophaya, that will get good, concrete, and actionable tips out to folks so that they have some sort of a framework for being able to operate in this unprecedented time. These tips are going to happen on a weekly basis. They're quick tips, 30 minutes in and out. But once I complete my prepared remarks, I'm going to open it for a Q&A for the group. So please feel free to jump in and talk about your particular situation, so we can hopefully give you a little bit of comfort and also some direction as to ways that you can proceed in this very chaotic and certainly unprecedented time. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick screen share. We'll pull up my slides so that you have a chance to see my prepared remarks. During the slideshow, if you can do me the favor of just muting yourselves. And folks, one of the things that we've done for this briefing is we've actually called on our friends at Microsoft to help us with the Microsoft Teams platform. We know that many of you right at this point in time are getting forced into using all sorts of tools that you're probably not familiar with. So Microsoft has been kind enough to really give us unprecedented access and also help with these briefings to allow us to be able to make sure that you are absolutely given the opportunity to practice with these things, which is going to be very important because video definitely is going to become part of your landscape. Whether you're familiar with it or not, you might as well get familiar with the platforms because this is not going away, folks. So video is definitely going to be something you're going to be familiar with. As I mentioned, our sponsors are the Remote Nation Institute and also Sophaya. And at the end, I will ask if people have questions. You can enter your questions or just just let me know that you have a question in the chat feature, and I'll invite you into the conversation at that time. So last week when we talked about the fact that suddenly businesses, through no fault of their own, were suddenly finding themselves in an unprecedented situation where they were experiencing emergency workplace shutdowns. And while we're 1 week into things and not everybody has shut down right now, there's a lot of chaos out in the world because many businesses have chosen to send non-essential workers home to work, so they're not in their office, and suddenly you have a situation where you've got individuals who are very unfamiliar with this circumstance, and they have been locked out of their offices. They have been asked to work directly from their homes, and so when we were speaking last week, we were really giving you tips that were geared towards, from an organizational point of view, what are some of the strategic considerations that very often get missed. Today's briefing, we're going to focus on the people that are part of your organization who have been foisted into a circumstance that they didn't anticipate. And even if they have experience with remote work, very often they're juggling whatever's happening in their personal workspace, whether that's negotiating with their family members or roommates or whoever cohabitates with them, but they're also managing colleagues less familiar with the remote work environment. So again, we just want to stress, we want to emphasize that this is not normal. This is not normal remote work. This is crisis remote work. And so every time we're doing a briefing, we're going to focus on those particular circumstances, really more of a crisis piece. So you sent everybody home. Now they're working remotely. And now what? What's happening with your people? What's happening with your team? Remember that this week, this is only week 2. So this is not normal. This week is pretty chaotic. You've got many people who are new to remote work. You've got many people who may or may not have used their home workspace on a routine basis. Maybe they've done this before, maybe they haven't, but they may also be juggling roommates or other family members who are in the same situation. And so depending on the particular home situation, this could be very, very, very chaotic. And so the first thing that we're advising all of our clients to do is take a deep breath, really kind of take a step back and be patient. And that's going to be an important concept because, if we see this workplace stoppage continuing for any length of time, then all the old rules are completely out the window. And that means that you've got individuals who are trying to juggle not only their work responsibilities, figure out what's possible for them to do right at this particular point in time, and also just navigating new horizons, new territory. They're being asked to, many people are being asked to work in situations that they literally never envisioned themselves. We have one national insurance client that is taking the unprecedented step of literally working their people out of their houses. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be helping them to transition 4,000 people who have literally, for the most part, never worked outside of a traditional office space and put them into their home situations. This is pretty unprecedented, folks. Large groups of people being moved out of their traditional work areas and really being asked to retool almost overnight. So appreciate that. Or while organizations are scrambling, and certainly we had a conversation last week about some of the, just the logistics and the challenges that are in the heads of your leaders, particularly at the strategic level, your senior executives in your organizations and your companies, but also your IT departments. It's like, there's a scramble to obtain devices, software, and just let me tell you that every single one of our clients are trying to get their hands on different equipment. And we've gotten to the point where things are not going to be available for love nor money. And so, excuse me, this is going to be one of those days where I'm going to be saying to every single client that I have, stop looking for new stuff. Let's do an inventory of what you already have on hand. And let's kind of focus on things that are within your 4 walls right now within your organization, and really kind of think about how you deploy those things strategically. But I'm also saying to people, You can't just focus on the devices. You can't just focus on the technology. You can't even focus on, you can't just focus on the crisis decision making. You also have to think about your people. Don't forget about the people who have never done this before. And I would argue, even if you're a remote work professional who has done this for a long period of time, like myself, I mean, this is something that we do for a living. And I will tell you that I'm being faced with lots of different variables that are even new to us, regardless of how much experience we have. And so I'm going to focus my advice to you today on what happens within your team? What happens between you and your workforce? If you're managing groups of people, what are some of your priorities? What are some of the top priorities that we're advising our clients to focus on this week? And that includes basics. We're talking about designing communication protocols that support the new remote team reality. How are you keeping in touch with people? People are scared, they're nervous, they're worried, they're upset, they're discombobulated, they're just, very disoriented. So how do you get them the information they need so we can get them calmed down? We can reduce that fear so that as you need them to execute on things, they're going to be able to do that. And then how do you implement the structure so that you can start to have folks remember that they're part of a team, so that this is not something that's an individual pursuit, but it's actually something that is a team effort. And so how do you get people thinking about the fact that they're team members? And then this is a big adjustment for a bunch of people who have never been without human contact. And we're finding this even with our healthcare clients, that even though they're in the healthcare field and they're actually physically going to a job, they now have something called PPE, personal protective equipment. So there is there's equipment they have to wear that is a barrier between them and their patients. They're being asked to stay within their particular locations, which means there's not as much free flow of traffic. There's not as much contact with other folks. So even though they might be reporting to work, there's definitely a sense of isolation. And so that peer-to-peer contact to stave off some of those feelings of concern, anxiety, and also stress. There's a lot of mounting stress. The reality at this particular point, this second week, means that we have literally transitioned individuals who have never engaged in this kind of work into remote employees. But that doesn't mean that they're proficient. It doesn't mean that they're up and running, and it certainly doesn't mean that they're feeling good about what's happening right now. So the more that we can help you focus yourself so that you can develop a plan that you and your people can use to unify and to come together so that you're moving in the same direction, and so your people know what's expected of them in this new normal, because it's not feeling normal to them. It's not feeling good to them. It is, you've got every range of emotion and reaction right at this point in time, from just disappointment that the decision was made, to fear that people don't know how to react to what's happening right now, what's right, what's not right, what's okay, and what's not okay. And if you're trying to work without a plan, you and your people will fail. And so the more that we can help you get focused, the more that we can help you think about how you come together as a group in this new circumstance, the more that stress will be reduced, the more you can get people to connect and to focus on the learning that has to happen, the building of new routines that have to happen in order for things to move forward. And then how do you get organized in a way that really positions your group of people for the best results in a very stressful and a very abnormal time? so one of the things that we talked about last time was we talked about the need to make sure that at your organizational level that there's a clear chain of command. You also need to do this at the team level as well. And so whether you're running a division, whether you're running an individual job function, or if you just have a few people reporting to you, appreciate that the chain of command still has to exist. Think of this as almost a military structure. And that's an important concept here because obviously the military functions as a deployed unit. People are not sitting in the same place. And depending on the circumstance and where that military force is deployed, every single person in that organization understands where they sit in the hierarchy and what their roles and responsibilities are. And this is an important component and a lesson that we draw from when we think about remote teams, because who's in charge, who's making decisions, and who can make things happen and make things happen fast is a critical part of any remote team's success. Remember, just like at the organizational level, we talked about centralizing decision making, you still have to do that at the team level. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get team involvement. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get team feedback. And that's an important consideration. Unlike the military, which is really structured to be a top-down command and control for obvious reasons. In our current situation, appreciate that if you're going to ask somebody to function as an autonomous remote work professional, then we also have to be able to have a partnership, colleague, coworker conversations that allow them to share information with you about what's working and what's not working, but also for you to be able to share information with them so that they have a sense of what's happening at the organizational level, what the expectations are now, what is possible to tackle, what's not possible to tackle, so that now you can kind of shift through this chaos and really kind of think about what's possible and what's not possible in this environment. And that means really kind of communicating that chain of command so that employees know who's in charge, and doing this with very simple and unifying messages. One of the things that we've done with several of our client organizations is we've actually set up weekly live stream town halls or different types of virtual meetings, which allow for a back and forth exchange of information. The town halls are always structured basically like our briefings that we're structuring right now, where you've got individuals who are leader decision makers, who are the face, who are showing themselves, because right at this point in time, what every team needs is information. When a team goes remote, information is vital. And whether we're talking about status updates, which give people a sense of what's happening right now, what is the current circumstance, what are the constraints, what's being asked of us, who is making decisions, who's calling the shots, the employee needs to know what's up. And so the town hall format is a nice format to follow, because if you've got that video presence, and we're going to emphasize this, folks, that video presence is going to become more and more important, because remember, disemboweled voices on the phone are better than nothing. But if you're trying to communicate with a remote team just through text messages or just through emails, then that human element has been removed, which means body language is not available. And it's really easy to disconnect from a text message that there's actually a human on the other side of not only the sending side, but the receiving side. And so the more that you can infuse your communication with some sort of humanity, the better. Information in a remote team needs to flow both ways. I can't emphasize this enough because remote teams are dependent on technical infrastructures and work process that are being essentially made up as we go along. They're cobbled together because this happened fast. Your people went out fast. Your organizations are scrambling. This isn't normal remote work, which means being able to very specifically get a sense of what is happening in reality versus what you thought would happen theoretically. There's going to be a gap, and you need information from your folks on the ground that you can share with your crisis operation team so that if there is a technical issue, it can be resolved. If there is an emotional issue, it can be resolved. If there is a barrier that's preventing people from implementing a process that you're trying to implement, then you can resolve it. But you can't do that if you don't even know it exists. So remember that remote teams are communicating using technology. So devices, internet connections are essential. If you have multiple people who are going to be working in these environments, appreciate that there's going to be potential bandwidth issues that you didn't anticipate, latency problems, which are impacting people's ability to be able to do things the way that they might have normally. And so the more you have back and forth conversations, and you're reaching out to your team people, and you're getting information from them better. And then, wherever possible, we're saying don't adopt new tools unless it's a video chat feature which you haven't used before, and maybe you've never used video, and so you're actually going into using video for the first time. And there's certainly lots of options out there. We happen to be using Microsoft Teams because we work in office environments, but at the same time, we're seeing Zoom being used, Join Me being used, WebEx, Skype for business. Whatever you have, utilize it, and utilize it to the hilt, because at least people have seen these things before. So it'll just be less jarring for them, and at least some folks on your team might have had contact with these tools already. Your concern as a leader is to calm the waters and give your people a plan. In the absence of information in a crisis, people get distracted. They're scared, they're worried, their thinking part of their brain is not engaging. Right at this point, tensions are running high. It's a fight or flight mentality, which means people are not thinking straight. They're not operating the way that they would normally. That means that you're going to see all sorts of weird, unusual, and unexpected behaviors. Be prepared. You're going to see the best, and you're going to see the worst of your folks. And so by setting up an infrastructure, and then starting that information flow so that you can start to let people know what's expected, what you need from them, what the focus is, what the priority is, and this is, I can't stress enough. It's like, remember, these are humans we're dealing with, right? The more specific you can be, the more detailed you can be. So there's clarity, so that there's a directive, so that people understand what is being asked of them. And then, this is a moment where you don't think about productivity. It's week 2, people are in chaos. Do frequent check-ins so that you're figuring out what folks need, but also this is an evolving situation. Things are changing really, really, really quickly. And so you need frequent check-ins because you got to give people updates, but also you got to figure out how they're feeling, because while the situation is evolving from a logistics and an operations point of view, it's also evolving from an emotional point of view. People are up and down and all over the place. So how do you build in ways for employees to share information with you, just like you're sharing information with them? And that's going to be very critical. And then finally, don't forget that these, your employees are people. This is a moment where you can't stand on ceremony. How do you create personal touch points that help people feel heard and seen? How do you use people's names? How do you get to know them? How do you acknowledge that this is hard for you too? You got to show your human side. This is a moment where it's not a good time to be stoic. We really want you to think about ways that you can allow your employees an opportunity to show emotions, and just be prepared. We have been running sessions for different colleagues, and we've had people break down. We've had people cry in these circumstances. We've had people express anger in these forums, and so moderators and team leaders should be prepared for the fact that there are lots and lots of things happening for folks. Allow your people those one-on-one opportunities to show those emotions privately. But the other thing is, let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, as a person who's leading a team, you can't be the only person who's providing support. And so one of the things we talked about last time is, how do you actually set up peer-to-peer connections and create those call tree forums and those call tree systems that allow individuals to be responsible for other individuals. And this is going to not only help accelerate information sharing, but it's also going to allow peer-to-peer to have conversations, so that you might be able to get additional information from somebody's peer that you might not be able to get from them directly, which will allow you to have more data to figure out how you should action with your team. Pair more experienced people with less experienced employee, and particularly if you've got folks who are familiar with remote work, get those folks working with less experienced remote workers, so that there's work process support, so that you can take whatever experience that's happening in your team and spread it as far and wide as possible. This is a moment to encourage peer-to-peer learning opportunities, peer-to-peer sharing opportunities, and the buddy system, so that you're not the only person who is assuming responsibility for the emotional well-being as well as the operational well-being of your team. Spread the wealth, and not only are you giving your people purpose, but you're also allowing yourself the bandwidth to take care of some of the things that you need to take care of. And so at this time, what I'd like to do is I'm going to end my prepared remarks. I'm going to end our slideshow, and I'm going to stop sharing slides, and I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions within the group, if you just let me know that you have a question, just really kind of do a quick type in the chat. Then what I'll do is I'll actually invite you into the conversation, and we'll take your questions in the order that they come into the chat. So if anybody has any questions, if you could just let me know, and I'll be happy to let you into the conversation. Do we have anybody who is interested in asking? Kim Marian, question. What question can we address for you today?
So I'm thinking about, as my husband is also now home, and I'm watching him really struggle with something. He's a bit of a micromanager. So he keeps thinking, how is the work getting done? How is the work getting done? How do I know the work's getting done? So-and-so didn't text me back instantly. it's stressing him out immensely. And I'm wondering, is there anything functional? I mean, other than saying, okay, I need to put myself in a new mindset, is there anything functional that he can put in place that would sort of help him get through this learning curve?
Yeah, and Kim, first of all, I want you to invite him to next week's briefing because we're going to talk about, we're actually going to talk about how do you make sure your team is working, because I
Oh,
think we'll
great.
have some good tips for him. But in the meantime, here's what I want you to ask him to do in the short term. One of the things that we've asked all our people to do is really have a group meeting and make some initial decisions up front. And those initial decisions, first of all, it's almost like you have to come together as a group and basically give each other dispensation for the current situation. Like, let's have some tolerance, folks. Nobody is getting any work done right at this particular point in time. Second week in, things are chaos. You have to negotiate with your roomies, whomever they might be. You're trying to figure out the technical side, and you're trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And so tell your husband to take a deep breath. And the next thing he should be doing is really giving people the benefit of the doubt and taking a step back and understanding that no great work will be done this week. And so you got to focus on priorities. And one of the priorities is bringing the team together and really kind of thinking about what's your new process for how you're going to get stuff done. What tools are you going to use for communicating? What is the expectation for when people are going to be available, and what's the protocol you're going to use to show people that you're available? And so they need to decide some basics. And so have your husband set up a team meeting with this group. If they've never used video before, this is a great chance to do it and practice with that video. And then really kind of get a read on temperature, because people are pretty emotional, and use that as a forum to basically say, hey, we're all in this together. What's the best way for us to at least get organized to start? And as we learn more, because if he's doing those daily check-ins with people, then by the end of the week we'll have a better sense of what's happening next, what's coming next, so that we can get people in a better place. So
That's great. Thank you. I think it might even build a little trust if he does this. So thank you. That's a great suggestion. I'll talk to him this afternoon.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about trust building next week, because trust is what makes a remote team work. So that's going to be a critical thing. Steve Bautista, you have a question for us. What can we answer for you today?
Hey, Marianne. So as an executive, you've designated a team leader, somebody to disseminate the information, to keep people rounded up, and to get people moving. Now, as an executive, how much should you be stepping in once you've done that? Should you be trying to make FaceTime every day with folks, or should you step back a little bit first?
Great. Steve, that's a great question. And this sort of ties with some of the things Kim was talking about with her husband. You can't micromanage remote teams. You just can't. And I think that that's an important concept that we're going to talk a lot about in these briefings. In a typical remote work situation, leading remote teams means you have to transition your leadership style to be much more like what we call mission control, which means you're directing people, you're helping to set priorities, but you're also coaching and counseling people to help them be able to manage their workload, remove barriers, so that they can actually execute on the expectations that you've set with them. And so this is something that in a typical remote work situation, you would have had these conversations ahead of time before you actually engaged in remote work. What's happening with Kim's husband, and one of the things that you are probably struggling with at this point in time, is this is not typical, which means you've gone from line of sight to an atypical situation where now it's a big black hole. And so the more that you can bring your people together and really kind of come up with with the protocols for this new circumstance. And the more that you can appreciate that your role has to shift, because you may be the person who is closest to the crisis team. So you're gonna hear the daily briefings or the routine briefings from your organization, and you're gonna have to be the person who carries that back to your group. But you're also helping them to set priorities and remove the barriers that are preventing them from meeting those priorities. And so your role has to shift, because in this circumstance, your people are going to have to work with a certain amount of autonomy, and you are going to have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And as we talk next week about setting up work priorities and those expectations so that you can work in this new reality, micromanagement has to be off the table, because it's just not going to work in these circumstances. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Kate, you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of using video whenever possible for better communication, but we don't currently use video. Do you have any tips about how I can convince others to do that?
Yeah, video has to be part of your solution right now. And this is an important component that we're stressing to all of our clients. We actually have, we've got everybody all over the spectrum. We've got one group of folks that's a national retail chain. They're actually a hearing aid distributors that are all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. We've been working with them for 6 years. And so we've actually conducted virtual conferences, like all staff conferences. And in that particular situation, they've just taken it to a new height. They have really understood that this is a platform which allows for a lot of personality and sharing, but it also intimacy, because you can physically see folks. We also have circumstances with a national insurance chain that has never used video, and they're incredibly awkward and reluctant. And one of the things I keep saying to them is, it's the rule of 3, folks. You know, the first time it feels incredibly weird, and you see yourself and you're worried about how you look and all of that sort of stuff. And at that point I say to them, you know, first of all, remember, if you go to a meeting in person, people can see you. You know, so in that meeting situation, if you're meeting face to face, you are visible. Well, and the only difference is in the video world, you know, it just means that you can actually see yourself, and so you're feeling a little awkward because of that. But the first time it feels awkward, the second time it feels less awkward, the third time now you're getting the hang of it, and the fourth time you can actually get into the spirit of it and make it fun. And so I'm literally holding practice sessions. I have a manufacturing company with a bunch of construction guys who are like, you got to be kidding me, you want me on video? And we've done it a few times, and I actually had a session with them yesterday where I was going through stuff, and we even survived the fact that his little 6-month-old got passed to him in the middle of the meeting. And so one of our meeting participants had a 6-month-old on his lap, kind of smiling at us for the duration of the meeting. So I think that that's an important thing, and it also brings the humanity back, and that's a really important thing. And then, as I said, we're doing a lot of virtual town halls where we have the senior leader on video, and that's a calming influence for the people that they're talking to, because it just helps them to see him, hear his tone of voice, but also see his body language, and those things are very important. So bite the bullet. Start introducing it slowly with your team, and then role model it. You know, when you're in those situations, get yourself on camera and then encourage other people to do it, and keep at it, and it will get better. Ralph, you got a question for us today? Ralph Hernandez, do you have a question for us today?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Uh, how will supervisors manage the work hours for their remote workforce in special situations? For example, some people may have their children at home, and then they may have to help their children during the day with, going online for their lessons or whatnot. So uh, that to me is going to be a challenge for supervisors. So how do you think they should handle that?
Yeah, and I think, Ralph, I think you've kind of highlighted, I just alluded to the fact that, I was doing something with a client earlier today. It's a construction company and they're deemed essential, but a lot of their folks are still working off-site. They're working from home. And in that situation, we've convinced them to use video, but a 6-month-old is now sitting on his dad's lap. And this is going to happen more and more because this is a 6-month-old. But what happens if we close schools? What happens if we close daycares? In those situations, now all of a sudden, we're in an unprecedented territory. And so supervisors and managers have to acknowledge that this is not a typical circumstance. This is not typical remote work. This is crisis remote work, which means you got to give people permission to to have their personal stuff bleed into their work stuff. But just like what I said to Kim and I said to Steve, this is a negotiation with your people right now, folks. This means you gotta set them up for success by bringing them together and understanding their circumstance. What are they up against? And you can't force people to do stuff that is impossible for them to execute on. And so have compassion, have tolerance, give people the benefit of the doubt, get to know your people, get out there and get to know your people and spend some time with them so that in these extraordinary circumstances, you can help them kind of work through and appreciate that you might be dealing with some of this stuff yourself. So it's like that's going to be really important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Qibing Yi, you have a question for me?
Hey, yes, Mary. So since we have been working from home like for a little bit of time, so some of the team members they experience they are less efficient, and some actually feel they are even more efficient working from home. So this is kind of a little bit unexpected. But we still have some projects which have a hard deadline going on. Like we need to finish that by this in a month, and some maybe smaller project might be sooner. But so during this time, because some people are more efficient, some people are less efficient, as a team, should we reallocate some of the task, or like usually we already have a task set up, like who do this part, who do another part before this thing happen. But now, like some people think, I'm sorry, they feel sorry that they don't get things too much done as they are in the office before. So how do you? But the problem, the deadline is still there. So how do you think we can keep with this?
Great. So Chibig, I think that this is going to be happening all over the place. And I think, first of all, I think second week in, it's hard to know how long this is going to last. But so the first thing is, I think that we have to, as a team leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, the first thing that you got to acknowledge is that this is not a week for productivity. This is a week of chaos. And so because people are in an unprecedented situation, I think that there has to be a reassessment of work priorities at this point in time. What is still important and what's not important? What's business critical and what's not business critical? And I'm going to invite you to come back to our briefing next week where we talk about, all right, how can you tell that your people are working? Because we're going to address some of this specifically. But one of the things I would absolutely say to you is you have to play to the team's strengths. If you have people who are more efficient right at this particular point in time, and you've identified your project as business critical, then you need to leverage the folks who are on the team who are familiar with this type of environment, who are just adapting quicker, whatever it is, and really kind of ask them to take on a little bit of a more expanded role while other people get themselves organized. And that's going to be really critical. And then the second piece is you need to also examine what's happening within the project and think about, are there steps that you can eliminate? Are there barriers that need to be removed? Are there extreme circumstances that would help you accelerate, or are there extreme circumstances that are just going to prevent you from moving forward with certain aspects of the project? You have to evaluate things differently. And so I think that that's going to be a really important thing. I think that it doesn't mean that you're going to have certain individuals pick up all of the workload while other people get a free pass, but it means that initially you may be asking people to step in to do certain things for the time being until you get things organized, and you can set realistic expectations and very specific priorities as to what you should continue with and what needs to be discontinued for the moment. That's going to be really important.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Folks, we've in an effort to answer your questions, we did go a little over time, but I appreciate you coming in this week. I hope that you come back for our briefing next week, where we're going to talk about geez, now you have your remote team, you've got them a little focused. How do you know they're working? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you structure operational protocols and work protocols so that you can keep your folks on task and actually start focusing them on productivity. So thank you very much for coming today. We also want to thank the Remote Nation Institute and Sophaya for their support of this briefing. And we'll see everybody next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thanks, Mary.